"You don't need to know my name," the man said quietly, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. "Just make sure you get home safe." The words didn't sound like much, not at first, not to someone like Victoria Hale, a woman used to boardrooms, private jets, and people standing a little straighter when she entered a room. But something about the way he said it, calm and unshaken, lingered longer than it should have as the late afternoon sun dipped low over a quiet stretch of highway just outside Cedar Ridge, where her car had broken down without warning, steam curling up from beneath the hood like a quiet signal of surrender. While passing drivers slowed only long enough to stare before moving on, their curiosity louder than their kindness. And for the first time in years, Victoria had found herself standing alone on the side of the road, heels sinking slightly into gravel, phone with no signal, controls slipping through her fingers in a way she wasn't used to, not in her world, not in any world she allowed herself to exist in, until he arrived without noise, without urgency, just the steady hum of an old pickup truck rolling to a stop a few feet behind her, engine ticking softly as it cooled, the door opening with a creak that matched the stillness of the air, and out stepped a man who didn't look at her the way others did. No recognition, no calculation, just a glance at the car, then at her, then back at the car again, as if the problem mattered more than the person standing beside it. "Car trouble?" he asked simply, his voice low, even, carrying none of the edge she expected, and before she could answer, before she could introduce herself or explain or control the narrative the way she always did, he had already moved forward, lifting the hood with a practiced hand, studying the engine with quiet focus while she stood there, caught between confusion and something unfamiliar, something softer, watching as his sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal arms that carried strength without needing to show it, his movements efficient, unhurried, like a man who had done this 1,000 times and never once needed applause for it. "You're overheating," he said after a moment, reaching for a small toolbox in the back of his truck. Loose line, easy fix, and the simplicity of it, the lack of performance, unsettled her more than any failure could have, because in her world, nothing was ever just simple, nothing was ever done without expectation. But here he was, tightening, adjusting, solving, without asking who she was, without glancing at the car's emblem, without noticing the quiet luxury stitched into every detail around her. And when he finished, he stepped back, closed the hood with a gentle push, and nodded once as if the matter was already behind him. "You're good now," he said, turning slightly as though ready to leave. And that was when she found her voice, sharp, almost instinctive. "Wait, how much do I owe you?" 3 quick words, direct, familiar, the language she understood, but he didn't turn fully, didn't step closer, just shook his head once, almost like a reflex. "Nothing," he replied, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it should have, stretching between them as the wind moved lightly through the trees, carrying dust and something quieter, something she couldn't name. "That's not how this works," she said, a little firmer now, a little more like herself. But he only glanced back, just enough for their eyes to meet for a second longer than expected, steady, unbothered. "Maybe not where you come from," he said, "but out here, you help because someone needs it." And then, without waiting for her response, without asking for recognition, without even offering his name, he walked back to his truck, climbed in, and drove off, leaving nothing behind but the faint echo of an engine fading into distance and a woman who had just realized, standing alone beside a now working car, that for the first time in years, someone had done something for her without asking for anything in return, and somehow, that silence spoke louder than any deal she had ever closed. Victoria Hale did not drive away immediately. Even after the engine settled into a smooth, steady hum beneath her hands, even after the warning light on the dashboard disappeared as if nothing had happened, because something had happened, something small and quiet that did not belong in her world of contracts and negotiations and carefully calculated outcomes. And she sat there for a moment longer than necessary, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the empty stretch of road where the old pickup truck had vanished, as if the air itself might give her an answer she could understand, but it did not. It only carried the fading echo of a moment she could not categorize, and that unsettled her more than the breakdown ever had. Because in her world, Everything had a reason. Everything had a price. Everything could be traced, measured, controlled, and yet this did not fit into any of those systems. Nothing. She repeated under her breath, the word unfamiliar in her vocabulary when it came to exchange, and slowly she pulled the car back onto the road, the tires rolling over asphalt with a quiet certainty that felt almost undeserved, while miles away, beyond the line of trees and the quiet turnoff, she had not noticed. Before, Ethan Cole drove in the opposite direction without a second glance in the rearview mirror, his hands steady on the wheel of his aging truck, the radio humming softly with a country station that faded in and out as he passed through pockets of weak signal. And to him, the moment had already passed, filed away with 1,000 others just like it, small acts done without witness, without memory, because for Ethan, helping was never about the story it created, it was about the problem it solved. And now that the problem was gone, so was the moment, at least for him, because his thoughts had already shifted to something else, something far more important than a stranger on the side of the road. A small house just beyond the edge of town, where the porch light would be flickering on as the sun dipped below the horizon, where a young girl with paint on her fingers and a question in her eyes would be waiting by the door, counting the minutes the way only children do when they believe someone will always come back. And when Ethan pulled into the gravel driveway, the tires crunching softly beneath him, the front door opened before the engine even turned off. "You are late," the girl called out, her voice bright but certain, standing barefoot on the wooden steps with a sketchbook tucked under her arm. And Ethan stepped out, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Had to make a stop," he replied, closing the truck door with a gentle push. "Help someone?" she asked, tilting her head the way she always did when she already knew the answer. And he nodded once, simple, honest. "Yeah," he said, walking up the steps and ruffling her hair lightly as he passed. "Car trouble." And she followed him inside, the scent of something warm and familiar filling the small kitchen, a pot simmering quietly on the stove, the kind of meal that did not require much but gave everything it could. And as Ethan washed his hands at the sink, the water running steady and clear, the girl leaned against the counter, watching him with quiet curiosity. "Did they say thank you?" she asked, and for a brief moment, just a brief one, Ethan paused, the memory flickering back, the sharp voice, the question, the expectation, and then he shook his head slightly, not in disappointment, but in understanding. "They did not need to," he said, drying his hands on a worn towel, his voice calm, grounded. "Sometimes helping is enough." And the girl considered that, her small brows pulling together as she processed a truth that did not match what she had been taught by the world outside their door, but she nodded anyway, trusting him the way only a child can trust someone who has never given her a reason not to. And outside, the night settled in quietly over Cedar Ridge, the stars beginning to show one by one in a sky untouched by city lights, while miles away, Victoria Hale drove through the glow of street lamps and glass towers, her reflection flickering across polished surfaces, surrounded again by a world that made sense to everyone but her. And yet something had shifted, something small but undeniable, because for the first time in a long time, she was not thinking about the next deal, or the next meeting, or the next move. She was thinking about a man who had walked away without asking for anything, and somewhere deep beneath the layers of control she had built over the years, a question had begun to form, quiet but persistent. What kind of person does that, and why could she not forget him? The next morning did not begin with answers. It began with questions, quiet ones that lingered in the spaces between routine and expectation. Because Victoria Hale arrived at her office earlier than usual, the glass doors of Hale Industries reflecting the pale light of dawn as she stepped inside with the same composed stride that had built her reputation. Yet something in her expression had shifted, subtle but present, the kind of shift only those who knew her well might notice, and even then, they would not understand it. Not yet, because as the elevator carried her to the top floor in silence, her mind was not on quarterly projections or investor calls. It was replaying a single moment, a man closing a car hood, a voice saying nothing is owed, a presence that asked for nothing and left everything unsettled. And when the doors opened, her assistant Daniel was already waiting, tablet in hand, schedule prepared down to the minute. "Good morning, Ms. Hale. You have a board call in." 20 minutes and a lunch with— Cancel the lunch, she said, not raising her voice, not breaking stride. And Daniel paused, just for a second, because she never canceled without reason. Reschedule? He asked carefully, and she stopped walking, turning slightly toward him, her eyes sharper now, more focused. No, just cancel it, she said. Then after a brief silence added, I need you to find someone. And that was the moment the rhythm of the day broke, because this was not how she operated, not how she directed her team, not without details, not without a name. Of course, Daniel replied, professional, steady. Who am I looking for? And Victoria hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, enough to feel the weight of what she did not know. And then she said it plainly. A man in his 40s, drives an older pickup truck, lives somewhere outside Cedar Ridge. And Daniel blinked, processing, waiting for more. That is all? He asked, and she held his gaze, calm but certain. That is all. And the silence that followed was not confusion, it was realization, because for the first time, she was asking him to find someone without status, without a file, without a footprint in the systems that defined her world. And Daniel nodded slowly. I will see what I can do, he said, though both of them understood that what she was asking did not fit into what could simply be done, because outside the walls of Hale Industries, Ethan Cole had already started his day the way he always did, before sunrise. The air cool and still as he poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it beside a lunch he had packed the night before. The quiet of the kitchen broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of early morning birds. And across the small table, his daughter sat with her sketchbook open, pencil moving slowly as she traced lines that only made sense to her. What are you drawing? He asked, pulling on his jacket. And she glanced up briefly. A road, she said, and a car that stopped. And he smiled faintly, not because of the drawing, but because of the way children turn small moments into something lasting. Did the car get fixed? He asked, and she nodded, tapping the page with her pencil. Yeah, because someone helped. And he paused again, just a moment, long enough to feel the echo of yesterday. And then he nodded. Good, he said simply, because that was enough for him. While miles away, Victoria stood at the window of her office, looking out over a city that moved exactly the way she expected it to, efficient, predictable, controlled, and yet she felt none of that control in herself. Not when her assistant returned an hour later with nothing, no match, no records, no leads, just a quiet admission. There is no one that fits that description in our systems. And she turned slowly, her expression unreadable, but her voice steady. Then look outside the systems, she said, and for the first time in years, the search she had begun was not about profit, not about leverage, not about winning. It was about understanding something she had never needed to understand before, a kind of quiet strength that did not ask to be seen. And the more she tried to define it, the more it slipped through her fingers, leaving behind only one certainty. She was not going to let it disappear. The search did not slow down. It sharpened, because by the second day Victoria Hale was no longer relying on systems alone. She was stepping into places she had not visited in years, places without glass walls or polished floors, places where names were not stored in databases, but remembered in passing conversations and quiet routines. And it started with a simple decision that surprised even her. She drove back to Cedar Ridge, not in a convoy, not with assistants, just her and the same car that had broken down, the road stretching ahead in long, quiet miles as if waiting to see whether she truly meant to follow through. And when she reached the exact spot where everything had shifted, she slowed, pulling over again, engine idling softly, eyes scanning the empty roadside as if something might still be there. A trace, a sign, anything. But there was nothing except wind brushing against dry grass and the distant hum of a passing truck. He was here, she said quietly to herself, as if saying it out loud might anchor the memory in something real. And then she stepped out, heels pressing into gravel once more, but this time she did not look lost. She looked determined. 3 quick breaths, steady, controlled, then 2 slow glances across the road, measuring distance, remembering angles, reconstructing a moment that had lasted only minutes but refused to fade. And then one realization settled in. He had not come from nowhere. He had come from somewhere close, because people like him did not drive miles for recognition. They drove minutes for purpose. And that thought guided her next move as she got back into the car and followed the narrow side road she had barely noticed before, a road that curved gently past fields and small houses, each one carrying signs of life that could not be tracked by any system she owned. Mailboxes with fading paint, porches with worn chairs, children's bikes leaning against fences, the kind of details that told stories without ever being recorded. And she slowed near a small gas station, the only one for miles, its sign flickering faintly in the afternoon light, and she pulled in, stepping out again with a purpose that felt both unfamiliar and necessary. "Excuse me," she said to the man behind the counter, her voice calm but direct. "I am looking for someone." And the man looked up, curious but unhurried. "Aren't we all?" he replied with a faint smile, and she did not return the smile, not because she could not, but because this mattered too much. "He drives an older pickup truck," she continued. "Mid-40s, quiet, knows how to fix cars." And the man leaned back, slightly, considering, his eyes narrowing just enough to show he was searching through memory rather than data. "That could be half the county," he said, and for a moment, just a brief one, frustration flickered across her face, but she held it in, steady, composed, because this was not a negotiation she could control. This was something else entirely. And then she added one more detail, softer this time, almost to herself. "He refused money." And that changed everything, because the man behind the counter paused, really paused, the kind that meant something had just clicked into place. "Yeah," he said slowly, nodding once. "I might know who you were talking about." And Victoria felt it. Not relief, not yet, but a shift, a step closer to something she had chosen not to let go. While just a few miles away, Ethan Cole stood beneath the open hood of another car, hands moving with the same quiet precision, unaware that the silence he had left behind was no longer empty. It was being followed, piece by piece, by someone who was beginning to understand that not everything valuable comes with a name attached, and not everything worth finding can be bought. The man behind the counter did not rush his answer. He let the silence settle first, the kind of silence that tests whether a question is worth answering. And Victoria stood still, hands relaxed at her sides, not pushing, not demanding, because she had already learned that this world did not respond to pressure the way hers did. "If it is who I think it is," the man said finally, leaning forward slightly, "you are not going to find him by looking like that." And his eyes moved briefly over her tailored outfit, her polished shoes, the quiet authority she carried without trying. And for a moment she almost responded the way she always did, with certainty, with correction, but she stopped herself, just enough to listen instead of control. "Then how do I find him?" she asked, her voice lower now, steadier, and the man gave a small shrug. "You do not," he said, not directly. 3 simple words, matter of fact, not unkind, just true in a way she was not used to hearing. 2 slow seconds passed as she processed that, her gaze shifting toward the window where the road stretched out again, ordinary, unremarkable, and then one quiet realization settled in. This was not a search that could be forced, it had to be followed. "He comes through here sometimes," the man continued, wiping his hands on a rag. "Early mornings, sometimes late afternoons, depends on who needs help." And that detail landed differently than anything else, because it confirmed what she had begun to understand. He did not move on a schedule, he moved on need. And that meant she could not predict him, only wait for him. And for someone like Victoria Hale, waiting was not a skill she had ever needed, not until now. "Thank you," she said. And the words were simple but deliberate, because this time she meant them without expectation, and she turned, walking back toward her car with a slower step than before, not hesitant, just thoughtful, because something had shifted again, not in the search, but in her. And as she drove away from the gas station, she did not return to the city right away. She stayed on the smaller roads, passing through Cedar Ridge with a different awareness, noticing the details she would have ignored before: a boy helping his father fix a fence, a woman carrying groceries into a modest home, a truck parked outside a small repair shop with its hood open and tools laid out with quiet order. And she slowed there, just slightly, her eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. But there was no one outside, just the echo of work left behind. And she kept driving, because she understood now that finding him was not about one place. It was about understanding a pattern she had never studied before. While across town, Ethan Cole was finishing up his day at that same small shop, the sun lowering behind the buildings as he wiped down his tools and closed the hood of the last car, his movements steady, unremarkable, and yet everything about them carried a kind of discipline that did not ask to be noticed. "You heading out?" The shop owner called from inside, and Ethan nodded once. "Yeah," he said, simple as always, and as he stepped outside, the air cooler now, carrying the quiet promise of evening, he paused just long enough to look down the road, not expecting anything, not searching, just observing the way he always did. And then he got into his truck and drove home, unaware that somewhere not far behind him, a woman who had built her life on knowing exactly what came next was learning, slowly, patiently, that some things could only be found by letting go of control, and for the first time in days, she did not feel frustrated by that. She felt something else, something quieter, something closer to respect. Waiting did not come naturally to Victoria Hale, but by the third morning, she found herself parked across the street from the small gas station just before sunrise, the sky still a muted shade of blue-gray as the world slowly prepared to wake, her engine off, her phone silent. And for once she was not reviewing reports or responding to messages. She was simply watching, because the man behind the counter had been clear, early mornings, sometimes late afternoons, and so she adjusted, not as a CEO commanding outcomes, but as someone learning to observe what could not be controlled. 3 quiet minutes passed as a single pickup truck rolled in and left again. 2 more followed with nothing but routine exchanges. And then one moment stretched longer than the rest as she noticed something different. Not dramatic, not loud, just a shift in the rhythm of the place. The kind of shift you only notice when you stop trying to rush past it. A familiar old pickup turned slowly into the station, its engine low and steady, and her breath caught slightly before she could stop it, not because she was certain, but because something in the way it moved felt right, and she watched. Carefully, not stepping out yet, not breaking the moment, because instinct told her this required patience, not interruption. And as the truck came to a stop, the driver stepped out, sleeves rolled just enough, movements unhurried. And even from a distance, she recognized the quiet in him. The same quiet that had unsettled her days before. The same quiet that had followed her back into a world that no longer felt as certain as it once had. But she did not move, not yet, because something else held her in place. A small figure stepping out from the passenger's side. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, carrying a sketchbook under her arm, her hair catching the early light as she looked up at the man and said something Victoria could not hear, but could somehow understand, because he smiled, faint but real, and the girl smiled back in a way that spoke of trust, of routine, of a life built on something simple and steady. And that changed everything, because in that moment the man was no longer just a stranger who had helped her. He was a father, someone whose world did not revolve around transactions or recognition, but around something far more grounded, something she had not considered before. And she stayed in the car, watching as they walked inside together, their movements easy, familiar, as if this was part of a rhythm that did not need to be explained. 3 quick seconds passed where she almost reached for the door handle, almost stepped out, almost turned the search into an answer. 2 slow breaths followed as she let her hand fall back to her lap, understanding something she had not understood before. This was not her moment to interrupt. And then one quiet realization settled in. Finding him was not the same as understanding him, and for the first time since the search began, Victoria did not feel the need to rush forward. She felt the need to wait, to see, to learn, because outside the system she controlled, outside the world she built, there was a different kind of order, one that did not respond to urgency, but to presence. And as Ethan Cole stepped back out of the station a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee and handing one to his daughter, with a simple nod, he did not look around, did not search, did not expect anything beyond the next moment in front of him. And Victoria, still sitting quietly across the street, realized that the closer she got to him, the more she had to change the way she approached everything. Because this was not about finding a man, it was about understanding a life that did not need to be found at all. Victoria did not follow immediately when Ethan's truck pulled out of the gas station, even though every instinct she had built over years of decisive action told her to move, to close the distance, to turn observation into contact, but something deeper held her still, something quieter, and she watched as the truck disappeared down the narrow road lined with low fences and scattered trees, the kind of road that did not rush anywhere. And for a moment, she sat there in the stillness, her reflection faint in the windshield, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel without tension, because this was no longer about catching up, it was about understanding timing. 3 seconds passed where she could have started the engine, 2 more where she almost did, and then one quiet decision settled in. She would follow, but not as before, not with urgency, not with control, so she started the car gently and drove at a distance, far enough to remain unseen, close enough to not lose the path, and the road led her through a part of Cedar Ridge that felt untouched by the pace of everything she knew. Small homes spaced apart by open land, a mailbox here, a porch light there, signs of lives lived without performance. And eventually she saw the truck slow and turn into a gravel driveway, the tires crunching softly as it came to a stop in front of a modest house with a worn wooden porch and a single swing hanging slightly off-center. And she pulled over farther down the road, her engine idling low as she watched from a distance that felt both respectful and necessary. And Ethan stepped out first, moving around the truck to open the passenger door for his daughter, a small gesture, almost invisible, but precise in its care, and the girl jumped down with energy, sketchbook still in hand, talking as she walked toward the house, her voice too soft to reach Victoria but her expression clear enough to read. And Ethan listened, really listened, nodding occasionally, not distracted, not divided, fully present in a way that did not need to be announced. And something about that moment landed heavier than anything Victoria had experienced in the past few days, because it revealed a truth she had not expected. This man was not extraordinary because of what he had done for her. He was extraordinary because of how he lived every moment beyond her. And she sat there, unmoving, as the front door closed behind them and the house settled back into quiet. 3 quick thoughts crossed her mind. She could walk up. She could introduce herself. She could finally get the answer she had been chasing. 2 slower breaths followed as she looked at the house again. Really looked this time. At the chipped paint on the railing, the simple curtains in the window, the absence of anything unnecessary. And then one realization settled deeper than all the rest. If she stepped into that space the way she had lived her entire life, she would disrupt something she did not yet understand. And so she did not move. Not yet. Because for the first time, Victoria Hale was not trying to be seen. She was trying to see. And as the minutes passed, and the quiet remained undisturbed, she reached for something she had not used in days. Her phone. Not to call, not to command, but to make a note. Not about the man, not about the location, but about the feeling, because what she was searching for was no longer just him. It was the meaning behind him. And as she sat there, the engine humming softly beneath her, the world slowing just enough to let her catch up to it, she understood something that could not be measured or owned. Respect is not given by power, it is earned in silence. And the man she had been searching for had never once tried to earn it. And yet somehow, he already had it. Victoria did not leave right away. Even after the front door of the small house closed and the quiet settled back over the gravel driveway, she remained in her car with the engine off now, the ticking sound of cooling metal filling the silence as the late afternoon lights stretched longer shadows across the road. Because something in her resisted the old instinct to act, to step forward, to introduce herself and resolve the question that had been pulling her here for days. And yet something else, something steadier, told her that this moment was not meant to be rushed. 3 thoughts rose quickly, clear and familiar. You have found him. You can walk up. You can end this search. 2 slower breaths followed as she watched the porch again, the slight movement of the swing as the wind brushed past it, the stillness of a home that did not expect interruption, and then one quiet truth settled in. This was not a problem to solve. It was a presence to understand. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Hale chose not to take control of the moment. Instead, she stepped out of the car slowly, closing the door with care so it would not echo across the quiet yard, her heels softer now against the gravel as she walked only a few steps forward before stopping again. Not at the house, not at the door, but at a distance that felt respectful, as if crossing it without invitation would break something she had only just begun to see. And she stood there, looking at the home not as an outsider evaluating it, but as someone trying to understand what made it whole: the worn railing, the simple curtains, the absence of anything excessive, and behind that door, a life that did not revolve around recognition or power, but around something she had never needed to define until now. And then she heard it, faint at first, a sound that carried through the quiet air: laughter, light and unguarded, the kind that does not perform for anyone, the kind that exists only because it is safe to exist. And it stopped her completely, because in that single sound was everything she had been searching for without knowing how to name it. 3 quick realizations struck her all at once. He is not waiting to be found. He is not trying to be remembered. He is already exactly where he needs to be. 2 slow steps brought her slightly closer, just enough to feel the weight of the moment more clearly, and then one final understanding settled in. If she knocked on that door now, she would be bringing her world into his, not meeting him in his. And that was not what this was meant to be. And so she stepped back, quietly, deliberately, turning away from the house with a calm she had not felt in years, because for once she was not walking away from something unfinished. She was walking away because she understood that some things are not meant to be taken. They are meant to be respected. And as she returned to her car, the gravel crunching softly beneath her steps, she paused one last time before opening the door, looking back at the house not with urgency, but with clarity. And in that still moment, something inside her shifted completely, because she no longer needed to ask who he was. She already knew what mattered. And when she finally drove away, the road ahead no longer felt like a path to a destination. It felt like space. Space to carry forward a lesson she had never been taught in boardrooms or meetings, that real value does not announce itself. It lives quietly. And if you are willing to slow down long enough, it will change you without ever asking to be seen. The city felt different when Victoria returned, not because it had changed, but because she had. The same glass towers still reflected the sky. The same traffic moved in precise patterns. The same meetings filled her schedule with exact times and expected outcomes. And yet none of it carried the same weight it once did, because as she stepped into her office the next morning, the silence followed her in a way it never had before. Not empty, not cold, but full of something she could not ignore. 3 executives began speaking the moment she entered, presenting numbers, projections, opportunities, their voices confident, practiced, efficient. 2 seconds passed as she listened without interruption, her expression calm, her posture unchanged, and then one quiet decision settled in. She raised her hand slightly, not sharply, not forcefully, just enough to pause the room, and for the first time in years, the silence that followed was not strategic, it was real. "Reschedule this," she said, her voice even, and the room froze, not in confusion, but in surprise, because she never stepped away from opportunity. She never delayed what could be secured, and yet she turned slightly toward the window instead, her gaze steady, distant, as if something beyond the glass mattered more than anything inside the room. Because in her mind she was not seeing the skyline. She was seeing a gravel driveway, a quiet porch, a man who did not need to be found, and a life that did not need to be proven. And that realization did not weaken her, it grounded her, because for the first time, she understood something no report had ever shown her. Value is not measured by what you control, it is revealed by what you do not need to control. And later that afternoon, without announcement, without attention, a small change moved quietly through her company. Policies shifted, decisions softened, not in a way that made headlines, but in a way that changed how people felt when they walked through the doors. Respect was no longer demanded. It was practiced. Kindness was no longer optional. It was expected, and no one could quite explain why. Only that something at the top had changed, and miles away, life continued exactly as it always had for Ethan Cole. The same early mornings, the same steady work, the same quiet dinners with his daughter. Nothing interrupted, nothing altered, because what he had done had never been meant to echo. It had simply been done, and that was enough. And one evening as the sun lowered over Cedar Ridge, casting long golden light across the small house, his daughter looked up from her sketchbook and asked, "Do you think the lady made it home okay?" And Ethan paused just